You ever notice how you get weirdly attached to things,
Hmm.
even if you've only had them for like a little while?
Hmm.
Like, remember those rental bikes
Oh, yeah.
everyone was using?
Yeah.
I swear after like biking across town on one, I almost felt like it was my bike.
Right.
It's crazy, right?
It's not crazy at all.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a classic example of what psychologists call the endowment effect.
No, okay.
This tendency we have to overvalue things just because we own them even temporarily.
I like that, the endowment effect.
Yeah,
Okay, so that's what we're diving into today.
that's right.
And this is something that Stephen Bartlett
Yeah.
talks about in his book, The Diary of a CEO.
Mm.
And he has this whole concept of 33 laws for business and life. And
Mm.
today,
Oh.
we are
Okay.
diving deep into Law 17.
Okay.
Let them try, and they'll buy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating law because it really highlights the power of this psychological quirk.
Yeah.
And Bartlett illustrates it brilliantly with a story about his niece and a Buzz Lightyear toy.
Okay, so paint me a picture. What's the story?
So it's Christmas presents are everywhere and in all the chaos.
Yeah.
Bartlett accidentally gives his niece a Buzz Lightyear toy that was actually intended for her brother.
Oh, no.
Just a classic holiday mix-up, right?
It happens?
But it turns out to be like the perfect real-life experiment
Okay.
because his niece becomes totally convinced that Buzz is hers,
Oh, wow.
refuses to give him up.
Oh, no.
He describes this kind of steely resolve in her eyes as she's clinging to this toy.
Yeah.
You can practically feel his panic as he's trying to explain the situation to a very determined 3-year-old who has already decided Buzz is her new best friend.
I can imagine. Yeah.
So Bartlett uses this hilarious anecdote to introduce this idea that just a few minutes of ownership, even
Yeah.
if it's completely accidental,
Right.
can totally change how we value something.
Totally. And that's where the link to Law 17 comes in.
Exactly.
He's arguing that businesses can use this to their advantage
That's right.
by letting people try before they buy.
Yeah.
You're tapping into that same endowment effect.
Like,
Yeah.
think about free samples at the grocery store or test driving a car.
Yeah.
Suddenly, it's not just a random product.
Right.
It's your coffee,
Yeah.
your car,
It's mine.
and parting with it becomes a lot harder.
And that's the thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
have you ever noticed how Apple stores
Oh, yeah.
are basically designed to make you feel like you already own everything?
It's brilliant, really.
It is.
They encourage you to pick up the phones,
Uh-huh.
try out the apps,
Yes.
take selfies,
Yep.
and the staff are super helpful but not pushy at all.
It's true. They're very good at that.
Right.
It's like they're saying, go ahead, treat it like it's yours.
Exactly.
And of course, the more you use it,
Yeah.
the harder it is to walk out without buying it.
Exactly. And this is exactly what Bartlett's getting at with Law 17.
Yeah.
This try before you buy approach
Yeah.
is incredibly effective because it plays on this deep-seated psychological tendency.
And this isn't just like a theory, right?
Yeah.
Like back in 2003, the Illinois State Attorney General's office actually issued a warning
Wow.
to shoppers about this.
Really?
I know.
That's interesting.
They were concerned about how retailers were using this very tactic
Yeah.
to influence people's purchasing decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So they were urging people to be aware of how touching and interacting with products
Yeah.
could make them more likely to buy.
It makes sense.
It's like they were saying, hey, just because you held it
Right.
doesn't mean you have to take it home with you.
Right.
But it's easier said than done right,
It is.
especially when you've already started to feel that sense of ownership.
Absolutely. And there's even research showing that this effect happens even without physical contact.
Really?
A 2009 study at the University of Wisconsin found that just imagining you own something can increase its perceived value.
Oh, wow. So even if you're just browsing online, looking at pictures, picturing yourself with that new gadget,
Mm-hmm.
the endowment effect might already be at work.
That's what the research suggests. And this ties into the whole try before you buy concept.
Huh.
Companies are essentially helping you imagine owning the product,
Great.
which then makes you more likely to buy it.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm thinking about like Build-A-Bear workshops.
Oh, yeah.
Kids go in,
Yeah.
choose their furry friend,
Yep.
stuff it themselves, dress it up.
Yeah.
The whole experience is designed to create this sense of ownership.
Exactly. It's a perfect example.
Yeah.
By the time those kids leave the store,
Uh-huh.
they're not just carrying a teddy bear, they're carrying their own creation,
Right.
something unique and special to them. And that sense of ownership makes it all the more valuable.
Which means they're probably willing to pay a premium for that experience.
Exactly.
Even though the materials themselves are pretty basic.
Exactly. The value comes from the emotional connection,
Right.
from that feeling of having created and now owning something special.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got Apple, we've got Build-A-Bear, but is there any research showing just how powerful this effect can be
Oh, absolutely.
in a more controlled setting?
There's a classic study from 1984 that used something as simple as lottery tickets to demonstrate the endowment effect.
Lottery tickets.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this.
So the researchers gave participants either a lottery ticket or $2.
Okay.
Then they offered everyone the chance to swap the ticket for the money or vice versa.
Okay, did people logically trade for what they didn't have?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But very few people were actually willing to trade.
Really?
Even though the value of the ticket and the $2 were basically the same,
Yeah.
those who were given the lottery ticket felt like it was theirs.
Wow.
And were reluctant to give it up.
So even something as random as a lottery ticket can trigger this feeling of ownership and make us overvalue it.
That's the endowment effect in action. And it's not limited to small items or hypothetical situations either. It plays out in real-world scenarios with much higher stakes.
Speaking of high stakes, tell me about that Duke University basketball ticket experiment.
Oh, yeah.
That's a whole other level of desire, scarcity, and the endowment effect all rolled into one.
It's a classic study that perfectly illustrates this concept.
Okay.
So Duke basketball is huge, right?
Yeah.
Way more demand for tickets than there are seats.
Right.
So the university uses a lottery system to distribute them.
Makes sense.
Mm.
Got to keep things fair somehow.
Right. So researchers use this system to study the endowment effect.
Okay.
They surveyed students waiting to enter the lottery,
Uh-huh.
some who ended up winning tickets and some who didn't.
Okay, so we've got our two groups, the lucky ones holding the golden tickets and those hoping to get lucky.
Exactly. So first they asked the students who didn't win tickets how much they'd be willing to pay for one.
I bet those tickets were going for a pretty penny.
On average, they said they'd pay up to $175.
Okay.
Not cheap, but understandable considering how coveted those tickets are. But then they asked the students who won the tickets how much they'd be willing to sell theirs for.
And this is where the endowment effect kicks in, right?
Yes, this is it.
What did they say?
Get this, the students who own the tickets wouldn't sell for less than $2,400.
Hold on, what?
I know.
That's over 14 times.
I know, it's crazy.
More than what the other students were willing to pay.
That's the power of ownership.
Wow.
Simply having those tickets in their possession,
Yeah.
even though they were randomly assigned through a lottery,
Right.
dramatically increased their perceived value.
That's wild.
I know.
It really shows how our sense of ownership can completely warp our perception of value.
Totally. And it's not just a quirk of human psychology either.
What?
It seems like this tendency to overvalue what we possess might actually have deep evolutionary roots.
Oh, really? Now that's interesting. Tell me more about that.
Well, there's this fascinating study from 2004 that involved chimpanzees,
Okay.
some fruit juice ice pops,
Okay.
and nut butter.
Okay. This sounds intriguing. Chimps and snacks, what happened?
So researchers found that chimps generally preferred the nut butter over the ice pops,
Okay.
which makes sense, probably more calories and all.
Yeah.
So they set up a trading scenario.
Okay.
They gave some chimps nut butter and some ice pops,
Uh-huh.
and then offered them the chance to trade with each other.
I'm guessing the chimps with the nut butter weren't too keen on giving it up.
You guessed it, most of them held on to their nut butter.
Yeah.
But here's the interesting part. A bunch of the chimps who were given the ice pops,
Yeah.
the less desirable option,
Right.
also refused to trade for the nut butter.
So even though they liked the nut butter better, they still weren't willing to trade away their ice pops.
Precisely. It seems like even chimps exhibit a form of the endowment effect,
Oh.
valuing what they possess simply because it's theirs.
So this tendency to overvalue our possessions might be hardwired into us,
It seems that way.
going all the way back to our primate ancestors.
Yeah. Researchers believe the endowment effect might have developed as a way to reduce risk.
Oh.
In a world without reliable systems for fair trade,
Yeah.
like, hey, I better hold on to what I've got,
Uh-huh.
even if it's not perfect, because who knows what I'll get in return.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
But before we go too deep into the evolutionary psychology of all this,
Yeah.
maybe we should take a step back and think about what this means for us today.
Okay.
Like, how does the endowment effect play out in the real world
Yeah,
beyond just chimps and lottery tickets?
that's a great point, and that's exactly what we'll be diving into after a quick break.
Sounds good.
So we've established that this endowment effect
Yeah.
is a powerful force, even in chimps.
Uh-huh.
But let's bring it back to humans
Okay.
and how this plays out in business.
Right. We were talking about Stephen Bartlett's
Yes.
Law 17.
Yeah.
Let them try, and they will buy.
Exactly.
So he basically argues that businesses can use this endowment effect to their advantage.
Exactly. It's all about creating that feeling of ownership
Yeah.
before the customer has actually paid for anything.
Right.
Think back to Bartlett's niece and that Buzz Lightyear toy.
Okay.
Just a few minutes of playing with it,
Uh-huh.
and she was convinced it was hers.
Yeah.
And companies do this all the time, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like those free trial offers
Yes.
for software or streaming services.
Exactly. Or like test driving a car.
Yes.
It's not just about making sure the engine works. It's
Right.
about getting behind the wheel,
Yeah.
adjusting the mirrors.
Feeling the leather seats.
Yeah.
Imagining yourself as the owner.
It's true. You start picturing yourself cruising down the highway in that car,
Right.
and suddenly parting with it seems unthinkable,
I know.
even if it means signing a hefty loan agreement.
Exactly. And that's exactly what savvy companies are banking on.
Yeah.
They understand that once you've had a taste of ownership,
Uh-huh.
the endowment effect kicks in.
Right.
Makes you much more likely to buy.
And Bartlett specifically calls out Apple as a master of this strategy.
Oh.
Their stores are practically designed to trigger the endowment effect.
You walk in and everything is laid out for you to touch, to experience.
Yeah.
You can pick up the latest iPhone, scroll through the apps, take a selfie.
Yep.
It's all about encouraging interaction
Mm-hmm.
and creating that sense of ownership.
Yeah, and it's not just about the products themselves, right? It's
Mhm.
the whole ecosystem.
Right.
You download a few apps, start syncing your devices, and suddenly you're hooked.
It's like they're slowly weaving you into their web, making it harder and harder to break free.
Right.
And it's incredibly effective.
Okay, but hold on a second.
Yeah,
Isn't this kind of manipulative?
that's a good question.
Like, are we all just being tricked by our own brains into buying things we don't need?
That's a valid question.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a fine line between smart marketing and outright manipulation.
Right.
But I think there's also a way to use this knowledge ethically.
So how can businesses use this endowment effect
Okay.
without being shady about it?
Well, first and foremost, it's about transparency.
Okay.
Don't try to hide the fact that you're using the psychological principle.
Uh-huh.
Be upfront about your try before you buy offers.
Yeah.
And make sure customers understand the terms and conditions.
So no sneaky auto renewals or hidden fees.
Exactly. It's also about focusing on genuine value.
Okay.
Don't just offer a free trial for the sake of triggering the endowment effect.
Yeah.
Make sure your product or service actually delivers on its promises.
So it's not about tricking people into buying something they'll regret later.
Right.
It's about giving them a genuine opportunity to experience the value of what you're offering.
Right. And that's where things like exceptional customer service,
Yeah.
personalized recommendations, a genuine commitment to exceeding expectations come in.
Yeah.
It's about building trust and creating a positive experience that goes beyond the initial purchase.
So the endowment effect can be a powerful tool for businesses,
Mm-hmm.
but it needs to be used responsibly.
Right.
It's not a magic bullet, and it shouldn't be a substitute for building a quality product or service.
Absolutely. Now let's flip this around for a moment.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about how businesses can use the endowment effect to their advantage.
Right.
But what about us as consumers?
Yeah.
How does this affect our everyday decisions?
Well, for one thing, it can make it really hard to get rid of stuff.
Yes,
We all have that drawer full of things we never use,
I know.
but just can't seem to part with.
It's that feeling of, but it's mine,
Right.
that keeps us clinging to things long after they've served their purpose.
Yeah.
Whether it's clothes that don't fit, gadgets we never use, or even old concert ticket stubs,
Uh-huh.
the endowment effect can make us hold on to things way longer than we should.
And it's not just about clutter.
Right.
This tendency to overvalue what we own
Yeah.
can affect our financial decisions too, right?
Absolutely. It can make us hold on to investments that are losing money.
Oh, yeah.
Simply because we're attached to the idea of owning them. We fall into this trap of thinking, if I just hold on a little longer,
Uh-huh.
it'll bounce back.
Even when all logic tells us it's time to cut our losses and move on.
Exactly. And it can also make it difficult to walk away from things that are no longer serving us.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's a job we hate, a friendship that's become toxic, or even a romantic relationship that's run its course.
It's like we're so focused on what we've already invested time, energy, emotions,
Mm-hmm.
that we're blind to the opportunity cost of holding on.
Right. Yeah.
We forget that letting go can actually be incredibly liberating,
Yes.
and that it can open up space for new and better things to come into our lives.
It's a tough lesson to learn, but it's an important one.
So how do we combat this tendency to overvalue what we already possess?
Okay.
How do we break free from the grip of the endowment effect
Yeah.
and make more rational decisions?
Well, awareness is definitely a good starting point, right? Just
Yeah.
knowing that this psychological bias exists
Uh-huh.
can help us take a step back and evaluate our choices more objectively.
So just recognizing those irrational thoughts.
Exactly. It's about shining a light on those irrational thoughts,
Yeah.
recognizing them for what they are.
Right.
It's also helpful to consider the opportunity cost of holding on.
Okay.
What else could you do with that space in your closet?
Yeah.
That money tied up in a losing investment?
Mm-hmm.
Or that time and energy you're pouring into a dead-end job?
It's about shifting our perspective
Yes.
and focusing on the potential gains rather than the perceived losses.
And sometimes it can be helpful to get an outside perspective.
Yeah.
Talk to a friend, a therapist, or a financial advisor,
Ah.
someone who can offer a more objective viewpoint,
Right.
help you see things more clearly.
They can help you weigh the pros and cons without all the emotional baggage
Exactly.
that comes with the endowment effect.
And remember, letting go doesn't mean you're devaluing the experiences or the memories
Yeah.
associated with something. It's about recognizing that sometimes holding on can actually prevent us from moving forward,
Wow.
embracing new possibilities.
It's about making space for growth, for new experiences, for new things that might bring us even greater joy and fulfillment.
Exactly.
But what if we could actually harness this powerful force for good?
Okay.
Like, if the endowment effect can make us cling to stuff,
Mm-hmm.
could it also help us value the things that truly matter?
That's a fascinating question,
Yeah.
and one that researchers are starting to explore.
So we know the endowment effect can make us hoard old concert tickets and cling to that one sweater we haven't worn in years.
Yeah.
But you're saying there's a way to use this to our advantage.
I think, so think about it this way. If we overvalue the things we own,
Yeah.
what if we apply that same logic to experiences,
Okay.
relationships,
Yeah.
even our own time?
Okay, now that's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
Instead of getting attached to a physical object,
Right.
it's about cherishing the memories of that trip you took with your friends
Mm-hmm.
or the bond you've built with your family over the years.
Exactly. Imagine feeling that same sense of ownership, unwillingness to trade them away,
Yeah.
that we feel with material goods, but applied to those intangible things
Right.
that truly enrich our lives.
It's like reframing what we consider valuable,
Exactly.
shifting our focus from the tangible to the intangible.
Yeah.
But does that actually work?
That's a good question.
Can we really trick our brains into valuing experiences as much as a new car
Right.
or a fancy gadget?
Well, there's actually a growing body of research that suggests focusing on experiences over material possessions
Yeah.
leads to greater happiness and well-being.
So if we could somehow harness the endowment effect
Yeah.
to amplify those feelings of attachment to our experiences,
Mm-hmm.
could we actually train ourselves to prioritize those things over material goods?
It's a fascinating possibility.
It is.
Imagine if we were as reluctant to waste time as we are to throw away an old t-shirt.
Yeah.
Or if we treated our relationships with the same care and attention that we give to our prized possessions.
Now that you mention it, I'm definitely guilty of wasting time way more often than I'm willing to admit.
Right.
But if we truly felt that same sense of ownership over our time,
Yeah.
maybe we'd be more mindful about how we spend it.
Exactly. We'd be more intentional about our choices, more protective of our free time,
Yeah.
and less likely to let others dictate our schedules.
We might even start saying no more often to things that don't truly align with our values or bring us joy. I like that.
Yeah.
But how do we actually make that shift?
Right.
It's one thing to understand the concept,
Yeah.
but it's another thing entirely to change your behavior.
It starts with awareness, like we talked about earlier. Recognizing that the endowment effect is at play
Okay.
can help us make more conscious choices. But beyond that, it's about actively cultivating that sense of ownership over the things we value most.
So making a conscious effort to appreciate those experiences, to nurture those relationships,
Yes.
and to invest in our own personal growth.
Exactly. And it also involves setting boundaries,
Yes.
protecting our time and energy,
Yeah.
saying no to things that drain us or distract us from what truly matters.
Right.
It's a constant process, and it takes effort,
Yeah.
but the payoff is worth it.
So let's bring this back to Stephen Bartlett and his 33 laws.
Okay.
We started this deep dive with Law 17, let them try and they will buy.
Mm-hmm.
which is all about how businesses can use the endowment effect to their advantage. But what you're suggesting is that we can actually flip the script
Yes.
and use this same psychological principle to sell ourselves on making better choices.
That's the beauty of understanding these underlying forces that shape our behavior.
Yeah.
Once we're aware of them, we can start to work with them rather than against them. Instead of letting the endowment effect lead us to make impulsive purchases or cling to things we don't need,
Right.
we can use it to amplify our appreciation for the things that truly matter.
It's like using the power of ownership for good
Yeah.
instead of for mindless consumption.
Exactly.
It's a powerful idea,
Yeah.
and I think it's a great note to end on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as you go about your day, I encourage you to think about the things you truly value, the experiences, the relationships, the aspects of your life that bring you joy and fulfillment.
Yeah.
And ask yourself, how can you nurture those things? How can you protect them?
Yeah.
How can you make them an even bigger part of your life?
Because in the end, it's not about what we own. It's about what owns us. The passions, the connections, the experiences that make us feel truly alive. And that's a wrap on our deep dive into Stephen Bartlett's Law 17 and the fascinating world of the endowment effect. We hope you enjoyed this journey with us and that you'll join us next time for another deep dive into the forces that shape our world.